Hi, this is Jim of Shiloh Hall, and I would like to discuss what I think are intercalation issues with respect to First Enoch and Jubilees, and specifically the reckoning of 364 days as established in First Enoch and Jubilees versus the currently observable 365.24 and some change days that we see and observe today. And I'll be using these scriptures in First Enoch, the chapters 72 through 75 and Jubilee 6. And specifically, I'm going to be visiting 1st Enoch chapter 74, verses 12 through 13, and then Jubilee 6, chapter 6, verses 32 and 38. But before I go there, I would like to set the stage a little bit with some videos. It's basically and universally agreed that the solar year that we observe today is not 364 days like we are told in First Enoch and also in Jubilees, but rather a measurable 365.24 ... number of days. So effectively it takes 365.24 days for the sun to come all the way back to its equal place at the equator to form the full year. So we have everybody in these various camps that are trying to establish the calendar and rectify the calendar against the observable number of days, are trying to find ways to calate and make it work. And they're doing so because of the perceived need to do so, because what we're being told in scriptures is not what we're observing in the world today. And I understand that, and I don't disagree with that, and I acknowledge that. And I've had some times where I thought maybe they're lying to us about the number of days, but when I look at George Nuber's work, it's pretty clear he's measuring it. It's not just somebody telling us how many days there are; it's measurable how many days there are in a full the length of time that it takes for the sun to come all the way back around and be exactly over the equator again. So it's measurable. And so there's a real definite need for this. And I understand that and acknowledge that. And here I'm going to play a little bit of just a little bit of the interview that Ken had in Hanging on His Words with George Nuber when they were describing, and I'll just give you a little background here real quick. George Nuber had gone through and established and I'll leave it to you to watch the video, but he had established essentially an observable methodology whereby over the course of 7 years, we intercalate an additional 7 days, which is basically a week. And then it brings us back it rectifies us with the 365.25 days. 24 days. But the reason that I'm going to this spot in this video is just because in this moment at the end of their interview, they just basically state it's just clear what the prevailing sentiments are with respect to this. So let me just go ahead and play it. I think it'll speak for itself.
And it seemed to work. The cycle seemed to work. It makes sense. And I didn't know about the priests that might have to have a 1 week rest. That would be interesting to find out where the scriptures for that is. But when I started seeing this, I said, "Oh, well, there's a 7-day rest for his calendar every so often, 5 or 6 years." And it's like,
Yeah, no, it's I haven't met one calendar that hasn't had to intercalate yet. So,
right.
I mean, a lot of people say, why isn't it in scripture? Why doesn't it show that we need to do that? Therefore, it's not true. Well, in reality, it has to be that way.
Right.
It just does. And I think Enoch, like what you pulled up earlier, Enoch may be alluding to that is where we need to kind of.
So let me make just a couple quick comments to this. First of all, Ken, just acknowledges the prevailing sentiment that it must be that way. Every calendar, every 364-day calendar must intercalate, must, because it has to be that way. And then they also reference, what George referred to in Enoch, and I'll quickly go there before we move on to the next. And if I misheard George or am misstating, then forgive me. I don't wish to do that to him. But he did reference in First Enoch chapter 74 in verse 11, there's this scripture that reads, "And the excess of the sun and the stars amounts to 6 days." And if I heard him correctly, he was basically suggesting maybe that is a scripture that somewhat alludes to the idea of additional intercalation other than what was specifically given to us, which is the 4 intercalary days. And so here's reference to another video that Ken did live with Alan Pisarek, I believe his name is, dealing with the solar calendar, the 364-day year, and then the need to do some additional intercalation. And then while watching George and Ken in their live discussion, they referenced this gentleman, Ken Johnson, and I'd heard of him, but it had been a while back since, and I don't think I'd ever watched any of his videos, but I heard them reference it, and because I have become more interested in recent months in the Dead Sea Scrolls than I had been just because of the information I'm finding, I became interested in his approach, because he's also got he's addressing leap weeks that George says doesn't really work, but it doesn't really matter. It's the concept here. Now I'm going to let this video play a little bit just because there's a couple things in here in addition to the leap week that I want you to hear him say. And let me also just say before I begin, it is commonly held, it's been commonly held because somebody put it out there, that the scrolls that were found in the Dead Sea caves must have been written by the Essenes. But if you do a little research on the Essenes, it appears that the Essenes were heavily nominal history and nominal understanding. If you go and follow Rachel Ellier, and go all the way to one of those videos that I've shared with you, you'll see that when asked in the questions, who she believes were writing, the commentaries that you see. I mean, it's one thing that they find biblical scripture so that you see the Tanakh and Isaiah scriptures, and then what they call the pseudepigrapha, which would be Enoch and First Enoch and Jubilees and such. Nobody's claiming to be the authors of those, but then there are also commentaries and some other writings that are clearly written by, apparently written by contemporaries of that time, that period of time, say between 175 BC and the time of Messiah here. But I guess the point I'm trying to make here is that I have come to be of the opinion that it is not the Essenes that have written those Dead Sea Scrolls. It's the exiled Zadokite priesthood that had their compound in. It was their compound and not an Essene compound. There's some documentaries that have the Essenes further south, I believe, down the Dead Sea coast there. But so the compound there at Qumran would be that of the Zadokite priesthood that had been exiled. And when queried and questioned about who the authors of these writings were, she basically said, by all appearances, they seem to be constantly referencing themselves as the Zadokite priesthood. I'll let you watch that video. It's in some of my commentaries. If you're watching this, you can see, in some of my playlists. If you're interested, you can find her in one of my playlists and then read that for yourself. So here, Ken refers to them as Qumranites. I can live with that, I guess, but I don't believe they're Essenes. And I've watched a little, since finding this, I've watched a little bit more of his information, and I appreciate him, I'm not sure, I just can't agree with his interpretation of who the authors of these scriptures are, because it would not be the Essenes, it would be the exiled true Zadokite priesthood. So anyway, that is the background. I'm going to let his video play here, and then I'll come back and comment to it.
We're back to studying the Dead Sea Scroll calendar. And the major thing that everyone is kind of confused on and trying to think of is how to do the leap weeks. So I wanted to give you the theories first. We want to be thorough and find all the theories possible and then go forward with them. So if we look at the theories, we have basically a few here. Number one, you can either add a day or two to each year at the start of every year, or at the start of the equinox at the end of the year. And that would keep it exactly, each year would start exactly on the equinox or on the Wednesday of the equinox. But if you did it this way, it would break the 7-day cycle. And since we're talking about Hebrews and the Sabbath being so very, very important, it doesn't seem like that would work. Plus, that's not the way the Qumranites did it, because their scrolls, they have a 3-year calendar and they have the lunar calculations on the calendar, so there's no gaps in the first 3 years anyway. So we apparently, or they at least, did not do that every single year. But that's the first theory. The second theory is that they didn't have any leap years. They just simply run everything through. That would cause summer to eventually be in winter and vice versa. So you could do that with a priestly calendar, I suppose, but you couldn't do that with planting, and you'd still have to keep a calendar of some other kind. And it seems like there's one and only one calendar. So it seems like that would be out. The third possible way of doing it, and the only one left really, is to intercalate a leap week every so often. So if we have to use some sort of thing, there's a theory about using the menorah and other things to calculate this. So in other words, every so often you would get off 1 week, and at that point you would simply have a leap week. You'd put 7 days back on, and then you'd be back on track. So we'd have to do this number 3 somehow. So,
okay, so let me just make some quick comments with regard to this. Number one, Ken is saying there are 3 options for figuring out this whole need for intercalation. One would be, his first is to add a day at the start of each year, a day or two at the start of each year, but he says that won't work because it doesn't keep the 7-day cycle, etc. But in that particular item, he says an interesting thing. He says the Qumranites, who would be, I think he thinks they're Essenes, but whoever the authors and the hiders of the scriptures and the documentation that took place in Qumran, which I'm assuming is who he's referring to as the Qumranites, they had a 3-year calendar with lunar calculations with no gaps. So for at least 3 years, there were no additional intercalary days added to the 364-day calendar that also had lunar calculations. And if you're interested, that starts at the minute 20 mark of his video. And then he gives us an option 2, which is do not have any leap years. But he says you can't do that. He says maybe you could do that with a priestly calendar, but not for planting. And so an additional calendar would be required, and there seems to be one and only one calendar ever mentioned, and etc. And so his comment then is that would be out. So he's basically saying have no leap years, but because there is no calendar or additional calendar, that is not an option. It would need to be out. And he mentions this at the minute 50 mark of his video. And then his option 3 is to intercalate a leap week every so often, which is what he believes needs to be done. So he begins to speak of this leap week, and then he mentions at the 2-minute and 31-second mark of his video, so we have to do this number 3 somehow. So I make these points, and let me just summarize the points that I'm trying to make. Number 1, he mentions that there are Qumranites, which I think are Zadokite priests, who have a 3-year calendar with no gaps. So there clearly appears to be, at least for 3 years, a calendar that exists with no gaps and no intercalation other than that provided for in 1st Enoch and Jubilees. And then number 2, he basically says that having no leap years must be out because of it would affect the planting. So his reference, without referring to it, the reason that it would affect planting, he says it would work in the priestly calendar observing 364 days, but it would not work with planting because eventually the seasons will get out of whack, and that's because of the 365.24 day, and that's what he's referencing. And then in his third options, which is to intercalate a week, he says we have to do this number 3 somehow. So he is revealing once again the prevailing sentiment that we must find a way to rectify the 364-day calendar to the observable 365.24 day year that we work with today and see today. And so all 3 of these that I just included in this particular video have come up with, using differing means, a cycle of 7 years that produces and requires 7 days or 1 week of intercalation or additional calation to be added. So they're all coming up with 7 days across 7 years that would rectify 364 days into 365.24 days, which at first sounds great. The number 7, it's such a perfect number. It has so many meanings in Scripture and Hebrew, and for the Hebrews, and it all sounds good, but it all still involves intercalation, additional days of calation that just I don't know how you find that in Scripture, and that's what it bumps up against, and that's what I'm getting ready to share with you now. And so here's where intercalation bumps up against Scriptures, and then I'm left to choose between Scriptures and what Scriptures seems to be plainly and clearly communicating to us, and then that contrasted against what we observe in the world today, which I admit is a quandary and it's difficult. But as I'll share at the end of this video, it's not the first quandary or difficulty we've ever run into with respect to what Yahuwah does. So let me just go to, this is, I'm at, what you're seeing here on the screen is 1 Enoch chapter 74, and I'm going to we're going to start in verse 12 here. And it reads like this: "And the sun and the stars bring in all the years exactly, so that they do not advance or delay their position by a single day unto everlasting, but complete the years with perfect justice in 364 days. And then in verse 13, "In 3 years there are 1,092 days, and in 5 years 1,820 days, so that in 8 years there are 2,912 days." And before I leave this screen, though, let me just comment that I've heard in different times in different places that it's the priests who have to keep a 364-day calendar so that they can keep, just keep the weeks correct and so that it works with the Moedim and the Sabbaths and different things. So the priests keep a 364-day year, but that the sun keeps 365.24 days. But that's just not what is being told to us here in 1 Enoch. In verse 12, it says, "And the sun and the stars bring in all the years exactly in perfect justice, with perfect justice in 364 days." So in Enoch, where we're actually getting our 364 days, and the rest of our instructions with regard to the calendar, they're not saying it's a priestly calendar that is 364 days. It's the solar, it's the sun and the stars who are bringing in 364 days. So really they're, as Ken Johnson said, they're really, that doesn't seem like, I don't know how there could be 2 different calendars, one for the priests and one for other purposes and means. It was one calendar of 364 days based upon a 364-day year for the sun and the stars, and that's what the priests were also keeping. So I've taken the days that Enoch just gave us in chapter 74, and I've just put them in a spreadsheet just so that we can quickly see them. Clearly across 1 year is 364 days, but then he tells us that across 3 years are 1,092 days. If you divide 1,092, that's 364 days. Across 5 years are 1,820 days. You divide 1,820 divided by 5 is 364 days. And then they go on to say further that across 8 years are 2,912 days. 2,912 divided by 8 is 364 days. So just a couple of quick observations. Across 8 years, it's still 364 days. And I would also say that he just gave us numbers that cross the required 7-year period of time that each of the other three gave us. From various reasons and in various ways, they basically say across 7 years, we need to intercalate 7 days. Well, we just saw Enoch tell us that across 8 years, there are 2,912 days, and there are no extra days. There's no 7 days in some periods, maybe even 14 days, but there's no 7 days added to the year in any of those 8 years. It's not, we don't have 2,919 days. We have 2,912, which is a 364 day year. So that's beating it to death. But the point is, there's no additional days added across 8 years in Enoch. And so it really leaves no room for intercalation or intercalary days in excess of the 4 he gives us every year. And again, just to restate, I don't know of any commands. Maybe there's information to find. Maybe we'll find information. Maybe somebody will have a revelation. I really don't know. But as it stands right now, we don't have any instruction to add intercalation days, additional intercalary days. All we have is the fact that there is a 365.24 day observable year that we have to rectify against 364 days. Well, I suppose that's what I'm getting ready to place an argument against. So this brings us to Jubilees chapter 6 and starting in verse 32. And I'm sorry, I'm going to have to read quite a bit here. If you're watching, you can see where I've highlighted. I will try to highlight as I'm reading. I'll pause and then try to highlight the points that I'm trying to make. And unfortunately, there are about 7 verses I need to read here. So let me just get started. So Jubilees chapter 6, verse 32. And I'm highlighting this first part here. And you shall command the children of Israel that they observe the years according to this reckoning, 364 days, and these shall constitute a complete year. Just a quick comment here, because I've heard others trying to talk about the priests having to reckon the 365.24 day as a 364 day year. Maybe, but I think the rest of the scriptures and Enoch pretty much eliminate that as a possible explanation for this scripture. I think they're really basically just saying that Israel is commanded to observe the years as being 364 days and not something else, which you will find a little bit further in this scripture. So let me keep reading, and I'll just back up just a little bit. 364 days, and these shall constitute a complete year, and they shall not disturb its time from all its days and from its festivals, for all shall fall out in them according to their witness, and they shall not leave out any day nor disturb any festivals. We go back to the top of the page, and I've highlighted. Verse 33, but if they neglect and do not observe them according to his command, then they shall disturb all their seasons, and all the years shall be dislodged from this order. So I've highlighted that because I'm pondering that if they neglect them, which they ultimately did, what happens? Well, it isn't the calendar that got disturbed. In this, what I'm reading here, it's not the calendar that got disturbed. Obviously, the calendar got disturbed. But it's really saying if they neglect and do not observe them according to his command, then they shall disturb all their seasons, and the years shall be dislodged from this order. So I'm pondering, in those days, was the actual observable solar year that we now measure at 365.24 days, would it have been 364 days back then? Has their failure to observe them changed and disturbed their seasons and dislodged them from that order, so that now we are seeing, and we're going to read a little bit more here, but so that now we're seeing something other than the original creation? And again, like so many other things, it's because of disobedience. Disobedience has changed his laws, his designs. So let me just keep reading. At the very end of that was, and let me back up just a second. And the years shall be dislodged from this order, and they shall neglect their laws. And then in verse 34, and all the children of Israel shall forget. And here I've highlighted the next phrase, and shall not find the path of the years. Is that another scripture saying that if they do not observe them according to his command, that the children of Israel shall not find the path of the years? Is that not what we're dealing with today? We're struggling to find the correct path of the years because we're observing 365.24 days. So we're just not finding the correct path, which should be 364 days. So let me keep reading here. And I'll back up just a little bit. I'll just start at verse 34 again and not stop. And all the children of Israel shall forget and shall not find the path of the years, and shall forget the new moons and seasons and Shabbatoth, and they shall go astray as to all the order of the years. Again, there you have another example. For I know, and from this time on I shall declare it to you, and it is not of my own devising, for the book is written before me, and on the tablets of the Shemaim the division of the days is obtained, lest they forget the festivals of the covenant and walk according to the festivals of the Gentiles after their straying and after their ignorance. Sounds pretty familiar. For there shall be those who shall assuredly make observations of the moon. Now it disturbs the seasons and comes in from year to year 10 days too soon. And then I've got this highlighted in verse 37. For this reason the years shall come upon them when they shall disturb this order. So again, it appears that through disobedience, the years are coming upon us, where the order of the years, they're just being disturbed. They're being changed. For this reason, the years shall come upon them when they shall disturb the order and make an abominable day, the day of witness, and an unclean day, a feast day. And they shall confuse all the days, and the Kodesh with the unclean, and the unclean day with the Kodesh, and they shall go astray as to the months and Shabbatoth and festivals and Jubilees. For this reason I command and witness to you that you may witness to them. And then I highlight, for after your death your children shall confuse them, so that they shall not make the year 364 days only. And for this reason they shall go astray as to the new moons and seasons and Shabbatoth and festivals, and they shall eat all kinds of blood with all kinds of flesh. So going back to what I've highlighted in verse 38, so for after your death, your children shall confuse them, so that they shall not make the year 364 days only. Again, going back up a little bit earlier in this chapter, when their disobedience was going to change the order. So now, doesn't it make sense that so we are not making the year 364 days only? We now have a 365.24 day year. So basically, if I'm hearing and reading Moshe in Jubilees correctly, or the angel, the messenger in Jubilees correctly, disobedience is going to disturb the order of the sun and probably the stars then. I mean, it would only make sense. And that because of that, it's going to all get disturbed and messed up. The order is going to get messed up. And ultimately, we shall not make the year only 364 days. And that is exactly what's happened. We are not making the year only 364 days. We are making the year 365.24 days. And so, in summary, is the point not that, or I'm making the point, I should say, that it is possible that the year used to be 364 days and 364 days only. It took 364 days exactly for the sun to return right back to its original spot. And now, because of disobedience and because of what we just read, it's no longer 364 days. It's disturbed. And we're now not observing just 364 days. We're observing 365.24 days, which completely screws up all the festivals, the Shabbatoth, the seasons, all the things we're supposed to keep. And I'm not sure how we're ever going to rectify it in the manners that we are working from. I'm not sure how we ever return to the original. And well, I know we can't return to the original, but we can't. What we need to do is return to Yahuwah's calendar, his time, so that we are observing the Shabbos with him and the Moedim, the festivals with him, so that we're on the same timeline, same page with him. And so here's what I am saying and suggesting, and I'm sure I can't be the only one. I'm sure I'm not the only one who has seen this, and maybe there are videos and people sharing this right in front of me, and I'm missing it. But here's what I'm suggesting as I watch everybody try to intercalate and rectify 365.24 with the command of 364 days. I find, and I've not heard anybody come up with a scripture that tells us we can add intercalary days to what has been given to us in Enoch. We have clear instructions in Enoch. We have 12 30-day months with 4 intercalary days with the season change every time, and we have a 364-day year exact. When we get to Jubilees chapter 6, it's clear in verse 32, and you shall command the children of Israel that they observe the years according to this reckoning, 364 days, and these shall constitute a complete year. To do other than that, we are not obeying at least the command of Jubilees. I suppose if you want to dismiss Jubilees as scripture, fine, then you have no command to follow. But if you do embrace Jubilees as scripture, which I now do, it was found in the Dead Sea Scrolls, whom I believe were scrolls protected and scriptures protected by the Zadokite priesthood in the days that they had been exiled. If you receive Jubilees, then you have this Torah. It's not the 10 Commands. It's not included in the, what we see written in Genesis and Leviticus and Exodus. I'm sorry, not Genesis, but Exodus, Leviticus, Deuteronomy. What we recognize is Mosaic law, but it's a command. It's a command of Yahweh. It's Torah. It's Torah. And so then the instruction is 364 days, not 364 days with 7 days added every once in a while. I just don't see it. I get why we're doing it. I fully understand why everybody's so motivated to do it. It's because that's what you're observing, and that's stands in contrast to 364. And many are saying, well, if you don't reconcile these, then it's not true. Well, I'm suggesting that it is true. The scriptures were true. And probably, according to Jubilees, probably the 364-day year was the norm back then. And now it's all been disturbed, and we're witnessing something that was not part of the original creation. We're witnessing and disturbing, probably for Yahuwah's own purposes and ways. But isn't this his way? Isn't this just his way? Throughout all scripture is his instruction to us is do what I say, do what I tell you to do, follow my command, do my Torah. The rest of it's his. The rest of it's his. And how many times have we witnessed this? I just reading this morning, I read all 4 of the gospel versions of the first time, and then also the second time that we had a large crowd. The first time there were 5,000 men plus children, and it's time to eat. And Yahushua says, feed them, feed them, Philip. And Philip says, what am I, with what? We got 5 fish or 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish. And it would take 200 pieces of silver to go buy enough food just for people to get scraps with. So he observed they had 5 loaves, 2 fish, 5,000 people. Impossibility. He observed that. And the natural thing to do is to try to work within natural and say it can't be done, or I got to go get bread. But what did Yahushua do? He said, have them sit down. He took the 5 loaves, 2 breads, began rocking Yahuwah and breaking it. And next thing you know, you got food for everybody to eat to their fill with 12 baskets left over. To work with, I suppose that if we had just not done what Yahushua commanded him to do, sit down and give me the fish and let me do. If we had not observed that command, we'd have never seen that we would have never seen that testimony, that miracle. I mean, that plays out everywhere you want to look. Terry, my wife and I were talking about the manna. They had instructions. The normal was a certain amount of manna every day, enough for a day's worth of food every day, except for the sixth day, in which case he doubled up. And then nothing came on the seventh day. What is that but a miracle? You follow the instructions, you get 2 days on the sixth day. Terry was talking about, Peter Kepha going and, it's time to pay taxes, and Yahushua sends him off to go catch a fish, and he opens up the fish mouth and there's money for the taxes. How many times does this play out? I mean, I could keep going, because go to the parting of the Red Sea. It really doesn't matter where you go. Everywhere you go is Yahushua honoring obedience, honoring it. And the command is, you do what you're told to do, and I'll take care of the rest. Yahushua will take care of the rest. You do what you're told, I'll take care of the rest. And when I go to, and I'm pointing at Jubilees over here on my other screen, if we just did this, if we were to observe the 364 days, would he return the year to 364 days? It's clear that if you aren't obedient, you're going to disturb them. If they neglect and do not observe them according to this command, then they'll disturb the seasons. The years will be dislodged from this order, and they'll not find the path of the years. And for this reason, the years shall come upon them when they shall disturb the order. For after your death, they shall confuse them, so that they shall not make the year 364 days only. And for this reason, they shall go astray to new moon seasons, everything. So what I'm offering and what I'm saying to everybody is, I get why we're doing it, but there's no command for what we're trying to do. There's only the command to observe 364 days. We have explicit commands. And I think if we go to chapter 74, it eradicates. It's almost like they did it on purpose. It eradicates this whole 7-year need to intercalate, add 7 more days every 7 years, because in Enoch, he takes us to 8 years, which bypasses 7 years. So, and then tells us, no, 8 years is 364 days a year as well. So it's almost like he's like he would know what he's doing. Where he's anticipating these explanations that we're coming up with, as I would like to think that as our camps are really with the heart of Torah, heart of seeking and doing commands, with this heart we're now approaching, but we have complications. Well, what if, and it would take somebody larger than me to actually lead this, of course, and I wouldn't, but what if somebody came on the scene and just said, we will observe 364 days, like Ken Johnson was saying that they appeared to be doing, the Qumranites were doing, where they had a 3-year calendar. They didn't intercalate, at least not for 3 years. And so what if we just did that? Would the years come back to 364? Or what if that's not how it plays out? In the days of Joshua, Yahweh made the sun stand still. That's changing time. What about in the days of Hezekiah, when he made the sundial go back? Wouldn't that be the sun doing something else? I mean, who knows what the explanation is? Maybe the sun going back, maybe it was just shadowing, because it's Yahweh and his miracles. He can do whatever he wants to do. He can fix the 364. But who says he's going to? When we continue to be walking in, not intentionally, I don't believe intentionally, but we continue to walk in disobedience because we're not following the 364-day year. If we just started observing the 364-day year without trying to add weeks, add days, and just did it, just went in a linear fashion and just went from one year to the next, and you just stay, would Yahuwah correct that? I don't know, and we'll never know if we keep doing what we're doing. We'll never know if we keep messing with the days and adding days. And I just don't see how we can do that. So I guess that's where I'll leave it. My point is that I understand, just in summary, I understand that the perceived need because of what we observe to intercalate, add more days to rectify 365.24 that we literally see being mapped out by folks like George. We literally see it, and we need to rectify that against 364. So it's compelling us to do what? It's compelling us to not follow the clear command to observe 364 days. I guess I'm just lobbying and offering it. I don't know how I can do it on my own, because I can't possibly get back to, if I can figure it out, I will. Or if I get, maybe Yahuwah will show me or reveal a scripture to me or something, or maybe I'll have a revelation, but I would be very circumspect with that. Maybe me, but I don't know how it would be me doing this. And I don't know how we would get back without help of Yahuwah to the correct days, even if we went to 364. But I think the starting point in all of this is to just begin to do the command, follow the Torah, observe 364, and then let him fix it for us. And then somebody's going to have to come on the scene with the resources and capabilities and talents to help lead us into where we need to go. If it is Yahuwah's intent that we return to the 364 day, the correct calendar before his second coming, which is, you'll see as I share elsewhere, that'll be the new covenant. And I know all things get corrected then. When he comes back, we will be on his calendar. It will all be corrected at that point in time. Will we get to a corrected calendar before he comes back? I don't know. Maybe. Would love it. But in the meantime, I've got to figure out who I'm going to follow on the calendars, and I don't know. I just have to see who we trust most in what they're observing and the spirit with which they are approaching all of this. But anyway, thank you. Thanks for spending time, and may you be Baruch.